people are incapable of having difficult conversations. And my reason for that is we're human beings and we have rich tapestry of lives outside of today's working environment, which means you have to have conversations with family members and friends about really difficult things, and you have to walk towards that because you don't want those people to...
David D'Souza, a leading voice in the world of people and work, currently serving as the Director of Profession at CIPD. He is also the Board Trustee at the RSA and MemberWise Ambassador of MemberWise Network.
And yet we know perfectly well that the greatest impact on individuals' performance is their relationship with their manager. And those people who have safety in that and confidence in it and happiness in it perform better, are more innovative and put more discretionary effort. What's your take on that?
I think there's acknowledgement that it's not where it should be. I think it's harder to isolate the levers to pull. I think they ended up with 30 people in the team leaving over a year, and we could never pin down what it was.
Hello, David. Welcome to The Power Between.
Hello, delighted to be here.
David, you're head of profession at CIPD, the large people organisation in the UK, and with tentacles further afield than that too, I think. You've been with CIPD for a good number of years, and then prior to that had some people roles elsewhere. What sort of drew you into the world of people management, people development?
So Director Profession here. I've been at the organisation for about 10 years. I've had a really varied career prior to that. So I dropped out of university due to family issues, and I went and stacked shelves at Marks and Spencer. And after a couple of months, they went, do you want to be in charge of some people? Like, we'll pay you, I don't know, 20p an hour extra, whatever it was. And I went, fine. That sounds like fun. And it wasn't. And I was ill-equipped to do it. And suddenly there are all sorts of problems coming from kind of different angles at you and things that you never had to deal with before. But I quite enjoyed it. And then after that, I went, traveled around a bit, did some different bits. And then I remember being given my kind of first grown-up team kind of within HR. And after a few weeks, my boss at the time took me into a room and she said, how does it feel being responsible and accountable for all those people's the success of their careers and whether they can pay their mortgage? I was like, oh, I had not thought of it like that. I thought of it as a kind of a step up to the next level and a thing that you had to do to advance your career. What I hadn't really thought about was the accountability and the responsibility that goes with it. And then from that point, I grew my career in HR, started working across organizations to improve the caliber of the people and the support systems that they had to help them flourish. And then a kind of natural evolution of that was to join the CIPD and have access to a bit more of the train set, is the way someone once kind of referred to it to me. They're like, you're only happy if you get the whole train set. And it's a bit of that.
Oh, you can always keep expanding the train set. That's the purpose of train sets. But lots of fascinating things in that. I mean, one, that revelation that, when you first got a people management role, you hadn't had any training for it. I mean, how frequent and regularly does that happen with people? And why do we expect people just to instantly be able to manage it when you're probably given training to do just about everything else? You're probably given training on how to stack shelves, which is rather simpler.
I've got some research that we do here. So we do something called the Good Work Index on a regular basis. We look at the kind of 7 aspects of good work. It's worth checking out that, and probably our labour market outlook. It's really strong in this space. But 40% of managers would say that they're not getting the training or support that they need to manage their teams. And that's people in role. And to your point, quite often you come from being out of role. And I'll go back to when I was 12, 13, my grandfather passed away. And we were kind of dividing things up between the family, and I was a voracious reader. And I picked up a copy of, many of your listeners will kind of know it, the Peter Principle by Lawrence J. Peter. And I'd never worked in an organization, but I read this book about the fact that the kind of general theory is everyone gets promoted to their level of incompetence. That's how it works. You keep getting promoted until they find out you're bad at things. But the starting point is you excel at your current role. So you are good at doing a thing, and then you are escalated into something that requires an almost uniquely different skill set. And we still see that happen in organizations. The person who's the best coder gets put in charge of the team of coders, but actually the skills and the capabilities you might need as a manager are very different to the ones that you may have had as unique strengths in your previous role. So it happens still all the time that you get accidental managers. I think there's 3 costs that accrue there. I think the people don't get the support, the guidance, the capability that they might need from their leader. It's not fun to be a leader and to get found out, or to be a manager and not know what you're doing. And finally, they're so critical to the success of organizations that where that happens, quite often what organizations do is they lose someone who was excellent at their job and they create a role where someone is making other people worse at their jobs, which is the wonderful and intriguing kind of multiplication effect of these roles. It's not about whether you're good, it's about whether you're making everyone around you better.
And yeah, I mean, it's fundamentally illogical to do that, isn't it? To make a change where you lose the expertise and you gain, in the Peter Principle words, a level of incompetence. So from an institutional CIPD point of view, what do you offer organizations? And I think I'm particularly interested in those sort of mid-sized organizations that have quite a lot of people, but maybe not of a sufficient quantity to have in-house development, in-house expertise to do that. What should that kind of organization be doing to prevent them falling into those traps?
I think there's a few things. I think one is through recruitment and selection and planning, recognizing the value of management. And I think quite often it's an adjunct to people's jobs. We'd like you to do your job a little bit bigger, but also you're going to look after these 3 people or these 7 people. And that's a really unhelpful way of thinking about what should be an absolute pivotal role in your organization. And quite often a pivotal role for the people in terms of their careers, in terms of their development, in terms of their trajectory. So we know that people who have a positive view of their line manager also report that they are more likely to be competent and effective, that they're less likely to have a negative impact on their health, which means they'll turn up to work, and that they're less inclined to leave organizations. If you started with what are the organizational outcomes we're trying to generate here, you'd never want to not have that in your people, that they're competent, that they're showing up, and that they're not going to leave. If you don't think about that hiring piece, then that's a challenge. But then to your point, it's around the training and equipping. So one of the things we've got better at in recent years is we will produce a guide for the profession, but we will also quite often provide alternate guidance that says, if you're a line manager, if you're just doing this directly to people rather than supporting that grouping, this is what you need to do. Because it's one of the observations probably others talking about, I think, is just how those roles have changed, evolved, and become more complex over time. And the expectations have grown and grown and grown. And I wrote a list earlier of the things that could plausibly be in the role of a line manager. And I don't think we call them out. We just say management as though it's a kind of amorphous blob of activity. Manage these people. But when you break that down into what the expectations might be, you would never put someone who is either inexperienced, doesn't care, or you don't think can accumulate their skills quickly in charge of it, because there's such a demanding breadth. And it's so pivotal to organization performance, particularly, as you say, in a mid-sized organization where 1 or 2 people not doing that is going to be really noticeable across your performance.
And I think the key word there, out of those 3 sort of capacities, that they're probably capable in terms of expertise, but it's caring. I mean, have you got an interest in being a manager, leading people? Have you got an interest in people? And it's perfectly legitimate to not have that, because you're more interested in developing the software or designing this or selling the product or whatever. And yet I'm not sure that when people are promoted into these roles, there is a great deal of focus on whether the caring, the actual people leadership, the management of others is on their sort of wish list of things that they want to do and are interested by.
I think I reckon probably 10 years ago, Facebook did a really interesting thing. And they were Facebook back then rather than Meta. And I think it's always really easy to point to big tech companies. They're kind of sexy and they attract the headlines. But you know, when you kind of like someone's thought quite hard about this, they offered all of their managers the opportunity to step back into technical roles. So they went, we've gone so far with the kind of pathway that we're describing. They went like, if that's not your bag, we don't want you doing it. And we'd rather you just kind of return to doing what you really enjoy and you're passionate about, because it does matter. So I've got a particular bugbear. This won't be an institutional view, or I won't kind of, I'm not claiming this is the CIPD stance, but we're having a chat and I think it's probably worth flagging. One of the things that people often managers through, particularly early in their career, but quite often difficult conversations training. Go like, we need to train you how to have difficult conversations. And I think that's a really interesting thing, because for the most part, my guess is it's not that people are incapable of having difficult conversations. And my reason for that is we're human beings and we have rich tapestry of lives outside of the day-to-day working environment, which means you have to have conversations with family members and friends about really difficult things. And you have to walk towards that because you don't want those people to hurt themselves or miss an opportunity or make a big mistake. So occasionally you have to like be a bit unpopular with them, but you care enough to make that happen. You like, if there's someone you really care about, you will find a way. But as soon as you bring those people into organizations, they go, I wouldn't know how to do those conversations. And it's not that, it's because they don't care enough to risk the relationship. They don't care enough about the people, or they don't care enough about their sense of duty. And quite often, I think we almost give people a get out, which is, I haven't been trained on this. Whereas I actually think it's the most human thing to do. That person is not performing. That person may need to leave this organization. That person's livelihood's at threat. Care enough to proactively have a conversation with them and go, I'd really like you to succeed. Let's work this through, but you need to understand there's a gap. And if you think about how often that's missed, and someone's basically going, I need to get rid of this person. If you told them they're failing, well, no, that would be really tricky. That to your point where you started it, I think that's a care piece. I don't think that's a skill thing. I think you just don't care enough.
But it's rooted in hierarchy, isn't it? Because in non-work circumstances, in those sort of family discussions or whatever, there might be a hierarchy of sorts, but there's never usually the option of firing someone. You know, you can't fire your parents or fire your children because you don't agree with them, or because the conversation's too difficult to happen.
I'm intrigued by that thought. I'm sorry, I'm going on like a mental. I'm like, okay, so I'm working through my family tree and going, who could I put on the performance improvement plan?
But and in fact, I mean, that's a theme that Bob Chapman from the Barry Vomiller organization in Midwest, who I've sort of had conversations with, champions, and he has this slightly folksy Midwest approach where you treat all your employees as if they are, well, not as if, because they are someone's precious son or daughter, and it frames it absolutely in that fashion. And during the lockdown, they didn't let anybody go, but they reduced everybody's salaries rather than getting people, and his reasoning was, if there isn't enough food to go around the family table, you don't get rid of one of the people around the table. Everyone just eats a bit less. And that creates that sort of community buy-in theory. Now that's not going to always apply everywhere, and business requires some things to be let go, but it's a mindset though, isn't it?
Yeah, I do. I think it's absolutely right. I think it's highly contextual, because I think there's some kind of challenges. I think in many organizations, you can create a really uncomfortable dissonance between we're treating you like family, but then you've been off for 2 times and here's a strike and here's a conversation, or so if you're doing that, I think you need to go all in with it, to your point, and that won't work for every model. But I think there's something there about the care that's really critical, because I think it makes everything easier. And I know that sounds really odd, but if I'm trying to have a conversation with you to help you perform, and you feel that at the heart of that conversation is, I really want you to succeed, and I'm prepared to take some risk on myself to make that happen, and to respect the relationship in you enough to make it happen, I think that's an easier conversation to have than if it feels just like I'm processing you. And you almost need that care for the times when it gets hard, because there's a degree of anything that's about discipline, about process, and there's a degree that's around relationship. And you want to feel that the person that is there normally to support your career and to support your performance and to help you succeed at something that takes up an awful lot of your lifetime, is at the very least rooting for you. I think it's not, are they on my side because they're representing the organization, but you want to feel that they want you to succeed. And I want to know that someone cares enough about me and wants me to succeed enough to give me a difficult message, not just to do the easy bits, but to give me a difficult message.
Yeah, that comes back time and again, this idea that, robust feedback, but delivered with care, is so much more valuable than sort of just pretending that everything's fine when it's not, and then you go over a cliff edge. So going back to the Facebook anecdote you had, do you recall how many people did, or what sort of percentage of people said, actually, I'd much rather go back to coding than having to look after people?
I don't think it was massive, but I know that they did it all wide. So I was really lucky. I was working for myself at the time, and I used to spend a day a week hanging out with kind of cool companies that I'd always wanted to know more about. So I spent a day at Facebook, right? Incredibly weird experience, a kind of day with innocent smoothies, day at Premier League Football Club. But I thought it was a really important message to them because it did two things. It said, one, we value you, and the only way to the top of this organization isn't just through picking up management reports, because that's the done thing. Secondly, it said we really care enough about our people for management to be something that we take seriously enough that we only want people doing it who want to do it. And I think those are two really powerful messages for organizations, because I think in so many organizations, it's a natural assumption that if you want to progress, you have to pick up direct reports. And that means that it's difficult to match that at times, I think, with a sense of service. And I think it's a really important thing if you are a manager to want to serve and support your people, because you're a determinant of so much of how they experience the workplace, whether they want to stay in the workplace, whether they are equipped to succeed, and whether they've got the right environment around them to succeed. So if I went back to my role of manager list, hastily written this morning, responsible for performance, well-being, including increasing, I think, mental well-being, and there are support and calls for that. So we can see that they're the person that you speak to, but they're also someone where if they are not effective, we know that's got a knock-on impact on people's mental well-being. They're a span breaker, so some people just exist because you can't have everyone reporting into the person above. They're a communicator, they're responsible for development, they're a translator of the organization. So lots of your experience of what the organization wants to do or is directing you to do comes through them. They're an organizer, they're a coach, they're a motivator, they're a collaborator, because they are quite often the link between you and other parts of the organization. When you add all of those things together, you've got one word that's covering a myriad of things that require different skills, different experiences, and different levels of commitment. And so just going, can you just pick up these 5 or 7 people and take care of them? I think when you go, that taking care involves all those things, as well as objective setting and all of the other elements we'd expect to be in there. It's no wonder that, 25% of senior managers say that they're under excessive stress. And you can see that it's a pinch point for organization.
And the corollary of that, or the outcome of that, is it takes an enormous amount of time to do all those different things. You can't carry on doing the same job you were doing before and put that on top of it without something giving. And the suspicion quite often is it's the management, the leadership piece that sort of fractures, rather than, because it's less obvious if you're succeeding or not until it's obvious that you're not. I mean, it's less measurable, I suppose.
It is, isn't it? And it's difficult to do the root cause on it. Between, like, the gap between I'm an adequate manager and I'm an excellent manager, the impact on people can be massive. But describing that, particularly when quite often you might be the only 2 people in a room if you're having a one-on-one conversation. And one of the things that any HR professional will tell you is how wildly different the interpretations of those conversations. If manager comes like, I thought we had a really good motivational chat, employees gone off to the toilets to cry. There's such a gap between that experience that it really does matter as to whether you've got people who can land those things consistently and have developed over time an understanding and a method that you never get it right the whole time. It's a bit like playing golf. You can be, no one's ever perfected it, but you can definitely be better or worse at it.
You can be better at I wasn't aware of that. I managed to play a pretty sub-average every time. But no, your point is well made, that, and a lot of it is practice. A lot of it is getting good guidance and role modeling. In fact, when you play golf with or any game with someone who's better, you tend to improve because you're given a little bit of guidance, but you also see you just sort of copy and mirror and improve that way. But it seems to me that in most organizations, that is the from the 70-20-10, it's the 70% that does all the heavy lifting, really, and the 20 and 10 is a little bit on the is probably less than 20 and 10. So I'm intrigued by what you said earlier, that the CIPD has sort of guidance around this. And if I understood correctly, you say it's sort of got guidance for organizations, but also guidance for line managers themselves. And the bit I understood, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that's almost for line managers where the organization isn't providing anything else or insufficiently. And so there's sort of little things that you can do as a line manager, even if the environment isn't ideal.
Yeah, completely. Also, it might be that you don't have the coverage in the HR team to make that. It might be that you have no HR team. And I think there are a range of resources. This comes back to, I think, the point that you made around training and space, I guess, white space to be able to execute not just the technical bit of your job, but the people bit, which is then determining quite often the success of your team rather than your individual success. And there are a range of resources that are available, some from us, some from other organizations, that mean people shouldn't be starting with a blank slate or feeling completely unsupported. But what you do need is your organization to care enough to give you time. Because there are lots of interventions that require zero, like no money. It doesn't really take negligible money to read a book, to go on a website, to get buddied up with someone, to find a mentor. All of those things any organization of any size can do. You don't need to have a graduate training scheme that's been in place for 20 years to kind of run off all of the leadership and management skills that you might need. You can, to your point around 70-20-10, that applies for the managers acquiring their skills as well. If you're around people who do it really well, who will give you the time at the end of a meeting to go, that's why I did that. Have you noticed that? That's how you can acquire that insight that you need, that you then need to, I guess, a bit like golf. Never played golf because don't like playing sports that I'm not going to be quite good at quite quickly. And I think that's the worst sports for that. So never tried golf, but I think it's that, if you've got the will and you've got the things available to you in your environment and price isn't always a barrier to that, then I think a large percentage of times you're going to be able to reach a level of competence and capability. There are some people, as with anything, where I think they're just naturally great. You see them step into that first role and the way they're making decisions shaped by their environment. I think over time, I'm not saying it's not a leaders born or shaped. It's not quite that, but I think there's probably life experiences that lead to someone stepping into that first time position. You're going, wow, they're just picking this up incredibly quickly and they're making smart decisions and incisive in the way that they understand people and group dynamics. But that support structure is key. The time is key. And to where we started, the design is key. If you design jobs where the managerial part is incidental, you send a signal to someone doing it that the managerial part is incidental, and you will end up with that day-to-day being an incidental piece, and you will pay the price for that over time. And the people that you employ that work for them will pay that price over time too.
And from your position or CIPD's sort of viewpoint, it's going to be a huge range, but where's the bulk of organizations, British organizations, on that spectrum of doing it brilliantly, doing it very poorly? Presumably they congregate somewhere in the middle.
It's an economic Achilles heel for the UK. The caliber of management, and you can look at stats from different organizations from different angles, But, what we're talking about here today, what you talk about on a regular basis, it's a real anchor and drag on individual organizations and at an economic level. It's a challenge there. If you have someone managing a team of 10, they are the difference between that being a team of 10 people developing, contributing, excelling, and providing more potential to the organization, and 10 people who spend a year grumbling about the quality of their experience and then gradually leave, and you have to take up the hiring costs. If you think about that multiplied across any organization of any size, the difference between being good at this and being excellent at this or poor at this is probably one of the biggest multipliers of organizational performance that's currently untapped.
And it does astonish me. There's a huge conversation going on here in the UK, but across Europe, across the world, really, around productivity and the slow growth, if any, in productivity. And yet we know perfectly well that the greatest impact on individuals' performance is their relationship with their manager. And those people who have sort of safety in that and confidence in it and happiness in it perform better, are more innovative, and put more discretionary effort in. And yet, from my perspective, and I'm not working very closely with government, it has to be said, I see very little conversation around that, or it's all about AI, it's all about investing in new innovation, it's all about scale ups, it's all about the sort of more transactional pieces than the relational piece. What's your take on that?
I think it's not part of the national conversation the way it should be. I think there's acknowledgement that it's not where it should be. I think it's harder to isolate the levers to pull. And even if I take that down to a firm level, if I kind of give a real example from early in my career, we had working in a contact center, and we had someone who I think they ended up with 30 people in the team leaving over a year. And we could never pin down what it was, because you're always one step or two steps removed from the situation. So you can see the outcome of that. But in terms of being able to explain to someone what is going wrong, that's hard, because as I say, you're either not in the room or you're not in the flow of that piece of that. You can't sit there for an entire day watching this person interact with their teams. And if you did, you've got the Hawthorne effect. So it's never going to be, as you would expect it to be. And if you play that out across an economy, it's difficult, I think, to isolate what's luck of the draw in terms of someone's team, what's lower quartile management performance, whether that's universal across everything they do or portions of what they do that make a difference in that time versus someone average. I think you can spot the people who stand out and are brilliant, but how you work with the people who aren't to get them up that kind of ladder of competence, I think it's more challenging. So I think if you are a government policymaker, you can agree that this is an anchor on the economy. But I guess unlike something with AI, where you go, look, we need to invest more, we need to improve the adoption curve, we need to make sure that we're not left behind in terms of where resources are based, or a national infrastructure rollout. You can't really have a national infrastructure rollout for management capability, particularly when it'll be really difficult to isolate how that works. Would you do it on, we talked about 70-20-10. Would you do it on the amount being invested into that? Well, actually, if what we're saying is most of it's in the flow of work, that's probably not a great measure for it. You wouldn't ever be able to pick up mentoring in that. You wouldn't be able to pick up, people. When I first started leading people, I was a voracious reader. I kind of read everything I could just to try and work out what felt natural and right to me, and then try some things with the team, and the team go, you're talking nonsense, or try another way. And you kind of end up, I imagine for most of us, there are some people who kind of go with one school of this is how I do things, and other people are kind of a bit of a melting pot of, I've picked up different things from different spaces and some from personal experience. It's hard to create a national strategy for that. And it will be a really worthy endeavor, but I think so much of it is at a firm level that it makes it slightly more challenging.
I buy most of that, in as much I think it's very difficult to legislate for it, but you can presumably create context and the environment for it to be more observed, more, for the conversation to happen more widely, and for people to be shining a spotlight on it more.
I think the economic drag It's been articulated by many organizations. I guess to your point earlier, actually, a really important one around SMEs, the criticality they play in the economy. And I guess, how would you gauge the quality of management in SMEs? You can poll it, but actually there's one of the things I say from really interesting early in my career was we used to do engagement surveys and we used to do 360 feedback and things like that. If anyone got a really low score, that meant they probably weren't a great leader of people. If anyone got an exceptionally high score, that also meant they probably weren't a great leader of people. Because quite often they were really well liked, but they weren't doing any of the other bits, or they were blaming the company for all the bad bits and kind of working through. And I kind of saw that kind of bell curve quite a few times, or kind of uneven distribution of that kind of performance. I think it's genuinely, I do think there's recognition that this is an anchor on productivity in the economy. I think it's just a harder one to get your hands around at a kind of ongoing policy level.
Absolutely. And because it is relational rather than transactional, it's always going to be difficult to measure the outcome. I mean, we know that all forms of management and leadership development are difficult to measure outcomes of directly. But I sort of feel that there's something around enabling the activities that lead to good development, even if the outcomes are difficult to measure, and they will be patchy, they will be better here than they are there, whatever. But as you said, that bit about creating sufficient space for people to do that reflection, people to have time to do it. You can almost, I mean, not legislate, but you can recommend frameworks where that is, and you can measure if that's happening to an extent. How it's used is going to be more tricky, but that seems to me like a good first step.
There was probably a conversation more active 10 to 15 years ago about high performance management approaches and high performing teams. I think that needs to come into the fore again. And I think actually the economic challenges at the moment lend itself to a conversation around like how do we get better value from the people that we have, and management around key to that. I think, we started off with what does the CIPD do? I guess the guidance that we provide is exactly what you're describing there, which is there are some things which are your situational judgment. There are some things that you just need to hit your mark on. If you work in an environment, it helps to agreed objectives with people. If you don't understand that, then you're going to leave people without clarity, without something that they're working to on a day-to-day basis, without something that you can recognize them for progress against. Now, there are different ways of doing that, because I think you can freestyle a bit more as you get further into your career. So what I mean by that is I've known great managers where the conversation isn't documented, but everyone's left crystal clear on what needs to be achieved, and someone's revved up to do it and they kind of go away. And I've known managers who can document something and someone's leaving the room bewildered anyway, or they don't think what's in the document is what they said. But as a starting point, I guess it's a bit like playing jazz. You need to be able to play the instruments well to deviate from it. And I think what you're describing is very true. What can we do to help people understand how you do the basics of that really well? And then I think it's probably at a firm level to take that to excellence.
And is that something that CIPD is sort of out there pushing?
Our head of public policy, practice and public affairs, a chap called Ben Wilmot. I can't stop Ben from talking about it. I always say it's a near obsession with Ben. So if you see a press release from us about the Employment Rights Act, you will see within that, upskilling of managers, support for managers, improvement of skill of managers. It's a constant refrain we come back to because it is just so pivotal. You can do a range of other things that are nice for your employees. You can look at all of the best practice that you might find in terms of incentives or benefits, all of those things. If they turn up each day and their manager isn't able to motivate them, support them, create an environment in which they can flourish and help them develop across their career, everything else is for naught. It's that pivotal.
I mean, I did a webinar, I think it was just last week actually, with Cranfield University, and they had someone there who ran a construction materials business, or he was general manager for Scotland for a big construction materials business, and he'd been on a Cranfield course, and this isn't an advert for Cranfield. Well, it is an advert for Cranfield, actually.
I mean, it's doing quite well as an advert for Cranfield, so if they're listening, they'll be delighted.
He was quite sort of old school in his management approach before he went. And he then sort of, on the program, had enough space to stop and think. I mean, what he said was it was the first time he'd been on a sort of work day, even though he wasn't in the office, and he hadn't looked at his emails for however long. And this, in fact, was a 9-month program. And the outcome was that he took a lot of pressure off people and he gave far more responsibility to people. So decisions weren't all elevated up to the next level because everyone was too frightened to make a decision. People were taking decisions at the appropriate level. That reduced workload and discussion. And that their payroll bill, same number of people, they didn't reduce anything, but their payroll bill, presumably because of lack of reduced overtime, was reduced by £1 million in a year. And their well-being scores went up. I mean, there was the most phenomenal sort of improvement from good practice. And you think, well, if that's just one business or one part of one business, how much of that kind of wastage is sitting out there in organizations that could be pretty easily and enjoyably? I mean, he was buzzing with the impact this had had.
I'm going to make a loosely non-evidence-based comparison. So just if someone's watching this and they go, show us your evidence, it's patchy. But there was some work done in the US school system that showed the difference between an upper quartile teacher and a lower quartile teacher was essentially from the deviation from the average was you'd learn 6 months more in a year from an upper quartile teacher, and you learn 6 months less than average from lower quartile. So that means the difference between having a lower quartile teacher and an upper quartile teacher was a year. Like, essentially, that was the difference it made to someone's education, like, in kind of netting out. I don't think it's the same as a student-teacher relationship. But to your point, I think the difference in terms of performance and therefore the impact on the bottom line can be the same between someone with a really advanced quality excellent management approach versus someone bad. It's transformative in terms of whether someone's moving forward, staying still, or kind of backsliding. And so that point you made, they haven't taken it out from the people. Work is flowing more smoothly because someone has made.
That's exactly what it is.
That's how pivotal that point is.
There's less friction in the system.
One person goes, I'm going to show up differently today. And that's going to enable everyone else to show up differently today. Completely changes their work, completely changes their financial outcome. That's how pivotal these things are. And to go back to the point that I guess we started with, if that's how pivotal it can be, you don't want to give that to people who don't want that job really, who come into it accidentally, who don't understand what the job means. And more importantly, if you do give it to them, you want space for them to be able to do that rather than just be marred in process every day and go, oh, I know I haven't seen you for 2 months, but I've had other stuff I've had to do in the flow of my work. It's an important role in and of itself. It's an important profession and discipline in and of itself. We can't treat it as though it's a adjunct on someone's core role.
No, and I think it just bears repetition after repetition that until people start picking up the baton with it. So, but I mean, that's to a large extent what CIPD is doing, I think, and it's what I suppose we're trying to encourage people to do through talking about it here. So, David, thank you so much for sharing your insights and knowledge and expertise and stories. It's been fantastic. As ever, these conversations rattle past. But David D'Souza, thank you very much indeed.
Lovely to speak to you. Thank you.